The hardest part about being abandoned is not the day someone leaves. It is the day they come back expecting everything to still be waiting for them. The woman standing on my front porch had not seen her children in 15 years. 15 birthdays. 15 Christmas mornings. 15 years of scraped knees, graduation ceremonies, broken hearts, achievements, setbacks, and ordinary moments that quietly become a life. Yet there she was, standing beneath the soft glow of my porch light, as if the missing years were nothing more than a long weekend. For a moment, I almost did not recognize her. Time changes people in ways photographs never capture. Her hair carried streaks of gray now. The confidence I remembered had been replaced by hesitation. She stood with both hands wrapped around the strap of a worn leather bag, shifting slightly from one foot to the other as though unsure whether she belonged there. The truth was, she did not. Not anymore. Through the living room window behind me, I could hear laughter. Emily had arrived earlier with her husband and 2 children. Jacob was helping prepare dinner in the kitchen. Sophie was setting the dining table while arguing playfully with her niece about where the dessert plates belonged. It was a normal Sunday evening. The kind of evening I once feared we would never have after everything that happened. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting a delivery driver. Instead, I found myself staring at a ghost from another lifetime. Rebecca looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "Hello, Daniel." Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I remained silent. Not because I was angry. Anger had disappeared years ago. Time has a way of wearing sharp emotions smooth. What remained was something quieter, something closer to acceptance. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the front yard. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower hummed in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Rebecca glanced past me toward the house. She heard the laughter too. Her eyes softened. "They are all here?" she asked. I nodded once. She swallowed hard. I was hoping they might be. The words hung between us. For years I had imagined this moment. Not because I expected it, because I knew it was possible. Life has a strange way of bringing unfinished stories back around. The only question is whether anyone still wants to read the ending. Rebecca looked older. Tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent a very long time carrying invisible weight. She opened her mouth as if preparing to explain herself, then stopped. Maybe she realized there were no explanations big enough to cover 15 years. Maybe she understood that some absences become permanent even when the person eventually returns. Behind me, I heard Sophie laughing at something Emily said. Rebecca heard it too. Tears appeared briefly in her eyes before she blinked them away. That sound alone told her everything she needed to know. Her children had grown up without her. They had built lives. They had created memories. They had become adults. And she had missed all of it. Standing there on the porch, I suddenly found myself remembering another evening 15 years earlier. Another conversation. Another door. Another choice that changed everything. Looking at Rebecca now, it was hard to connect the woman standing before me with the woman who had walked away. But before I tell you why she came back, you need to understand why she left. 15 years earlier, the end of my marriage arrived on a Thursday evening that looked completely ordinary. The kids were finishing homework at the kitchen table. Emily was 17 and filling out college applications. Jacob was 14 and trying to convince me that he needed a newer basketball hoop. Sophie, only 8 years old, sat coloring pictures while humming softly to herself. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. Looking back now, I realize peace often disappears without warning. Rebecca came home later than usual that evening. The moment she walked through the front door, I sensed something was different. Not because she looked upset, because she looked certain. There was a calmness in her expression that made me uncomfortable. She placed her purse on the counter and stood quietly for several seconds. The children barely noticed. They continued talking, laughing, and arguing over small things the way families do every day. Then Rebecca asked if we could talk privately. I followed her into the living room. The sun was setting outside the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Neither of us sat down. She folded her arms and looked away before finally speaking. "Daniel, I cannot do this anymore." At first I assumed she meant an argument we had not resolved or stress from work. Marriage has difficult seasons. We had survived plenty before. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She took a slow breath. "I am leaving." The words felt unreal, like hearing a sentence in a language you understand, but somehow cannot process. Leaving for how long? I asked. She shook her head. Not for a trip. Not for a break. I am leaving. I stared at her, waiting for additional words that never came. An explanation. A misunderstanding. Something. Instead, she simply stood there. Calm. Certain. Prepared. What about the kids? I finally asked. Her eyes lowered briefly. They will be fine. Even now, 15 years later, those 4 words remain the hardest part of that conversation. They will be fine. Not because they were cruel. Because they revealed how far away she already was. She had convinced herself that the children would simply adapt to losing their mother. That life would somehow rearrange itself around her absence. I asked questions. Hundreds of them. Most received vague answers. She said she was unhappy. She said she wanted something different. She said she needed to find herself. The phrases sounded rehearsed, as though she had repeated them many times before saying them aloud. Eventually, the truth emerged. There was another man. She believed he represented a different future. A better future. A life she had convinced herself she deserved. The conversation lasted less than an hour. The consequences lasted 15 years. What hurt most was not her decision to leave me. It was watching her decision affect the children. Emily overheard enough to understand what was happening. Jacob sensed trouble immediately. Sophie remained blissfully unaware. Rebecca packed several bags that evening. The children gathered near the staircase, watching in confusion. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to stop what was already happening. As the front door opened and Rebecca prepared to leave, Sophie looked up at her with innocent certainty and asked the question that would echo through our lives for years. Mama's coming back tomorrow, right? The question stopped time. Sophie stood at the bottom of the staircase, clutching her coloring book against her chest, looking up at her mother with complete trust. She was 8 years old. At that age, children still believe parents always come back. They still believe promises are permanent. Rebecca looked down at her for several seconds before forcing a small smile. Not tomorrow, sweetheart, she said softly. But I will see you again. Sophie nodded as if that answer made sense. It did not. Not to her. Not to any of us. Emily immediately turned away. I could see tears forming in her eyes as she hurried toward her bedroom. She was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. Old enough to recognize that her family had just broken apart. Jacob reacted differently. He crossed his arms and stared at the floor. His jaw tightened. At 14, he was caught between childhood and adulthood, old enough to feel anger but too young to know what to do with it. Nobody stopped Rebecca when she walked toward the door. Not because we did not want to. Because there are moments when you realize someone made their decision long before they announced it. The front door closed behind her, and silence settled over the house. I remember standing there listening to nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No explanation that could make sense of what had happened. Just silence. Then Sophie looked up at me. When is Mom coming home? She asked. Every parent eventually faces a question they are not prepared to answer. That was mine. Over the next few days, the children reacted in different ways. Emily withdrew into herself. She spent hours in her room pretending to study while quietly trying to process the loss. Jacob became angry at everything. School, homework, rules, life. Even the smallest inconvenience could trigger frustration because the real source of his anger was too big to confront directly. Sophie kept waiting. Every afternoon she glanced toward the driveway when she heard a car. Every evening, she asked if her mother had called. Every morning she expected news. Children measure time differently than adults. A week feels like forever. A month feels impossible. Yet she kept believing. I did my best to hold everything together. I packed lunches, helped with homework, paid bills, drove to practices and school events. During the day, I focused on practical things because practical things felt manageable. The nights were harder. After the children went to bed, I would sit alone in the kitchen staring at unfinished cups of coffee while trying to understand how our lives had changed so quickly. Friends offered advice. Family members offered sympathy. None of it changed reality. The house still felt incomplete. Empty spaces appeared everywhere. An unused chair at dinner. A missing voice during conversations. Photographs that suddenly looked different. But life does not pause simply because your heart wants it to. School continued. Work continued. The children continued growing. And slowly, without realizing it, we began adapting. Not healing. Not yet. Just surviving. Looking back now, I understand something I did not know then. The hardest years of our lives were about to begin. But so were the years that would define who we eventually became. The first year was the hardest. Not because we lacked food or shelter. Not because we faced some dramatic crisis every week. It was hard because ordinary life suddenly required twice the effort. Every responsibility that had once been shared now belonged to me alone. Every decision, every appointment, every school event, every late-night worry. I quickly learned that single parenthood is not one large challenge. It is 1,000 small ones waiting for you every day. My alarm clock rang at 5:30 each morning. I prepared breakfast, packed lunches, woke the children, got everyone ready for school, and then rushed to work. After work came grocery shopping, homework, laundry, cleaning, and everything else necessary to keep a household functioning. By the time I sat down each night, I was exhausted. Yet somehow there was always one more thing that needed attention. Emily stepped into adulthood faster than she should have. At 17, she often helped Sophie with homework and watched over her younger siblings when I was running late. I hated that she had to carry responsibilities that belonged to adults, but she never complained. In many ways, she became my partner in holding the family together. Jacob struggled differently. His anger lingered for years. Some days he barely mentioned his mother. Other days a simple memory could change his mood completely. I learned not to force conversations. Pain has its own schedule. Sophie remained the most difficult to watch. For nearly 2 years, she kept a small framed photograph of Rebecca beside her bed. Every birthday, she asked if her mother might call. Every Christmas, she secretly hoped a gift would arrive. Sometimes disappointment is not loud. Sometimes it is a child quietly lowering expectations 1 year at a time. There were nights when I questioned whether I was doing enough. I remember sitting at the kitchen table after everyone was asleep, reviewing bills under the soft glow of a single light. The house would be silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. In those moments, the weight felt enormous. I worried about money. I worried about mistakes. I worried about whether the children would eventually resent me for things beyond my control. But every morning the sun came up, and the kids needed breakfast. That simple fact kept me moving forward. Life rarely gives parents the luxury of falling apart. The children were watching. They needed stability more than they needed perfection. So I focused on consistency. I attended every school conference I could. I sat through every concert, game, and ceremony. I learned how to braid Sophie's hair after several embarrassing attempts. I helped Jacob practice free throws in the driveway. I spent weekends touring colleges with Emily. None of those moments felt extraordinary at the time. They simply felt necessary. Looking back now, I understand they were building something much bigger than I realized. Trust, security, family, the things that survive when everything else changes. Years passed slowly at first. Then all at once, the children grew taller. Their voices changed. Their interests evolved. And somewhere along the way, our house stopped feeling broken. It did not happen overnight. It happened through thousands of ordinary days stacked quietly on top of one another. By the time I noticed it, we were no longer surviving. We were becoming something stronger. Years have a way of turning survival into routine and routine into a life. Before I realized it, Emily was walking across a stage in a blue graduation gown while I sat in the audience trying to understand how 17 years had disappeared so quickly. I still remember the moment they called her name. She smiled as she accepted her diploma, then looked toward the crowd until she found me. Not the empty seat beside me. Not the place where her mother might have been. Me. The person who had been there for every early morning, every late-night study session, every moment of doubt. After the ceremony, she wrapped her arms around me and said, "We did it, Dad. Not I. Not you. We." Those 2 words meant more than she could have known. Jacob followed a few years later. By then he had grown into a confident young man with a strong sense of responsibility. The anger that once defined his teenage years had slowly faded. Not because he forgot what happened, because he learned how to carry it without letting it control him. He earned a college scholarship, and I still remember helping him move into his dorm room. As we carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, he suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Thank you for never giving up on us," he said. The comment caught me off guard. Parents rarely expect gratitude. Most of us simply hope we did enough. Sophie's journey felt different because she was so young when everything changed. She barely remembered life before her mother left. Over time, the questions became less frequent. Then one day they stopped entirely. She focused on school, friends, sports, and eventually college applications. Watching her grow into a confident young woman filled me with pride and sadness at the same time. Pride because of who she became. Sadness because someone chose not to witness it. Through all those years, holidays became our anchor. Thanksgiving dinners crowded around the kitchen table. Christmas mornings filled with wrapping paper and laughter. Summer barbecues in the backyard. None of them were extravagant. They were simply ours. Family traditions built one ordinary year at a time. Rebecca never appeared. Occasionally a birthday card would arrive. Sometimes months passed without any contact at all. The children stopped expecting anything. Eventually they stopped discussing her altogether. Life moved forward. Emily built a successful career and started a family of her own. Jacob found meaningful work and bought his first home. Sophie graduated with honors and chased dreams that once seemed impossible. Watching them succeed became one of the greatest joys of my life. Not because success proved anything, because it confirmed that they had survived. More than survived, they had flourished. Somewhere along the way, I changed too. The exhausted father sitting alone at the kitchen table became someone stronger. Not because life became easier, because responsibility teaches resilience when you have no other choice. Looking back, I no longer focused on what we lost. I focused on what we built. A family defined not by who left, but by who stayed. And 15 years later, as I stood on my front porch staring at the woman who walked away from all of it, I realized she was looking at the results of 15 years she would never get back. Standing on the porch, Rebecca could not stop looking past me toward the sounds coming from inside the house. Laughter drifted through the open doorway. The smell of dinner filled the air. Family photographs lined the hallway behind me. She was seeing pieces of a life that had continued without her. And for the first time I wondered if she truly understood what 15 years meant. "Can I see them?" she asked quietly. It was a simple question, but the answer was not simple at all. I looked over my shoulder toward the dining room. Emily was helping her daughter color at the table. Jacob was carrying a tray of drinks from the kitchen. Sophie was laughing at something her brother said. None of them knew who was standing outside. None of them knew the past had just arrived at the front door. "I do not know if they will want that," I answered honestly. Rebecca lowered her eyes. The response hurt her, but not because it was unfair. Because it was true. 15 years earlier she made a choice. The consequences of that choice belonged to everyone now. She nodded slowly. "I understand." We stood there in silence for a moment. Then she surprised me. "They look happy." I glanced toward the house. "They are." Her eyes filled with emotion again. "Good." There was no bitterness in her voice. No attempt to take credit for anything. Just quiet recognition of what she had missed. Looking at her, I realized something. The woman standing before me was not the confident person who left years ago, believing happiness waited somewhere else. Life had clearly humbled her. Whatever dreams she chased had not led where she expected. I did not ask for details. Not yet. Some stories reveal themselves slowly. "What happened?" I finally asked. Rebecca took a long breath. "The life I chose did not become the life I imagined." Her answer carried the weight of years. She looked out across the front yard as fallen leaves drifted through the evening air. At first, I convinced myself I had made the right decision. Then too much time passed. Every year made it harder to come back. I listened quietly, not because I was forgiving her, because understanding and forgiveness are not the same thing. "I thought about calling hundreds of times," she continued. "I always found a reason not to." The porch light reflected in her eyes. Then one day I realized I had spent 15 years waiting for the perfect moment that never came. Inside the house, someone laughed loudly. The sound made both of us turn toward the window. Rebecca watched Emily helping her daughter with a puzzle. For a second, she seemed unable to look away. That scene represented birthdays she never attended, school events she never witnessed, and milestones she never shared. Entire chapters of life had unfolded without her presence. "They do not need me," she whispered. The statement carried no anger, only sadness. I thought about that carefully before responding. "Children always need parents," I said, "but eventually they learn how to live without them." The words settled between us. Neither of us could deny their truth. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I realized this conversation was no longer about the past. It was about what happened next. And before I could decide whether to invite her inside, the front door opened behind me and footsteps approached. The footsteps belonged to Emily. She pushed the screen door open while carrying an empty serving bowl, probably heading toward the outdoor refrigerator on the side patio. The moment she stepped onto the porch, she froze. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The evening air suddenly felt very still. Emily's eyes locked onto the woman standing beside me. At first there was confusion, then recognition, then something far more complicated. 15 years is a long time, but some faces never completely disappear from memory. Rebecca opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. Nothing came out. Emily looked from her mother to me and back again. "Dad?" she asked quietly. It was not really a question, more a request for confirmation. I nodded once. Emily's expression remained unreadable. She was no longer the heartbroken teenager who ran upstairs crying the night her mother left. She was a grown woman now, a wife, a mother, someone who had built her own life. Yet I could see old emotions moving behind her eyes. Rebecca took a hesitant step forward. Emily. Hearing her name seemed to affect her more than seeing her. Emily lowered the bowl slightly. "Hello, Mom." The words sounded strange. Not angry, not warm, just unfamiliar, like a language she had not spoken in years. Rebecca's eyes immediately filled with tears. "You look beautiful." Emily offered a polite smile. "Thank you." Another silence followed. The gap between them felt much larger than the few feet separating them on the porch. Rebecca glanced toward the house. "Are your brother and sister inside?" Emily nodded. "Yes." "Do they know I am here?" "No." Rebecca swallowed hard. "Would they want to see me?" Emily looked away for a moment. The answer clearly was not simple. Finally she said, "I honestly do not know." The honesty seemed to hurt Rebecca, but she accepted it. Emily set the bowl on a nearby table and folded her arms. "Why now?" she asked. There was no accusation in her voice, just curiosity. 15 years of unanswered questions condensed into 2 words. Rebecca stared at the porch floor. "Because I ran out of excuses." Emily listened quietly. "For a long time I convinced myself there would be a better time. Then I realized there never would be." A faint breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere inside the house, Sophie's laughter drifted through an open window. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly when she heard it. Emily noticed. "She is doing well," she said. "We all are." Rebecca nodded. "I can see that." For the first time since arriving, a small smile touched her face. Not a happy smile, a grateful one. The kind that comes from seeing something precious even when you know it no longer belongs to you. Emily studied her carefully. "Dad raised us well." I immediately wished she had not said it because I knew how much it would sting. Yet it was also true. Rebecca lowered her head. "I know he did." Another silence settled between them. Then voices sounded from inside the house. Someone was looking for Emily. More footsteps approached the door, and within seconds, the rest of the family would discover who had returned. The next person through the door was Jacob. He stepped onto the porch carrying a tray of iced tea glasses and immediately stopped when he saw Rebecca. Unlike Emily, he did not need several seconds to process what he was seeing. Recognition appeared instantly. His eyes widened. Then his expression became completely neutral. He carefully placed the tray on a nearby table before speaking. "Mom." The words sounded calm, but I knew my son well enough to hear everything hidden underneath it. 15 years of unanswered questions. 15 years of birthdays without a phone call. 15 years of learning how to live without someone who was supposed to stay. Rebecca looked at him with disbelief. The teenage boy she left behind had become a grown man. Taller than me. Confident. Successful. The kind of man any parent would be proud to know. "Jacob," she whispered. He nodded politely. Nothing more. No anger. No warmth. Just politeness. Somehow that seemed harder for Rebecca than hostility would have been. Before anyone could say another word, Sophie appeared behind her brother. She stepped onto the porch smiling, expecting to join a family conversation. Then she saw the stranger standing beside me. Her smile faded. For a moment she simply stared. Rebecca looked at her youngest child as though the entire world had stopped turning. 15 years earlier Sophie had been 8 years old. Now she was 23. The little girl who once waited by the window for her mother to come home was gone. In her place stood a confident young woman with a life of her own. Rebecca covered her mouth with one hand. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Sophie." The name barely escaped her lips. Sophie remained still. Not because she was angry, because she seemed unsure what she was supposed to feel. How do you react to someone who exists in your memories, but not your life? For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Sophie quietly asked, "Why are you here?" The question was simple, honest. direct. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Because I wanted to see you. Sophie glanced toward Emily and Jacob, then back at Rebecca. After 15 years? No bitterness. Just reality. Rebecca nodded slowly. I know I do not deserve anything from any of you. Jacob folded his arms. Then why come now? The evening air felt heavy with emotions nobody knew how to express. Rebecca looked at each of her children one by one. Because every year I told myself I would come back tomorrow. Then tomorrow became another year. Nobody responded immediately. Emily looked down. Jacob stared toward the yard. Sophie remained focused on the woman standing before her. Finally, Sophie asked the question that mattered most. Did you ever miss us? Rebecca's face crumpled. Every day. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. Then she surprised all of us. We missed you too. For a while. The words were not cruel. They were simply true. Rebecca closed her eyes. That single sentence carried more weight than any accusation ever could. The children were not standing there with hatred in their hearts. They had moved beyond hatred years ago. What remained was distance. Life had continued. Memories had formed. Families had grown. The empty space Rebecca left behind had eventually filled itself. Looking at my 3 children standing together on that porch, I realized something remarkable. They were not confronting their mother with anger. They were confronting her with the consequences of absence. And there is no harsher truth than realizing life found a way to continue without you. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The porch that once felt crowded with tension now felt filled with something else. Understanding. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just understanding. Rebecca looked at her children as if she were trying to memorize them all over again. Emily standing beside the doorway with the quiet strength she had developed over years of responsibility. Jacob with the calm confidence of a man who had built his own future. Sophie with the honesty that only comes from someone who no longer needs answers in order to move forward. Rebecca wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. I am proud of all of you, she said softly. Emily nodded politely. Jacob looked toward the yard. Sophie offered a gentle smile in return. None of them rejected her. None of them embraced her. The reality was much more complicated. They had spent 15 years learning how to live without their mother. No single conversation could erase that distance. Rebecca eventually looked at me. I do not expect anything, she said. I know I cannot get those years back. I believed her. For the first time that evening, I truly believed her. The woman who left had spent years chasing a different life. The woman standing before me finally understood the cost of that choice. Some lessons arrive late. Some arrive too late. But they still arrive. Emily stepped forward first. I think we all need time, she said. Rebecca nodded immediately. Of course. Jacob agreed. Sophie did too. There was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting. No emotional speech that magically repaired everything. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, there was honesty. The kind that only appears after enough years have passed for everyone to see the truth clearly. Rebecca reached into her bag and removed a small piece of paper. She handed it to Emily. My phone number, she explained. In case any of you ever want to talk. Emily accepted it. Not as a promise. Not as a rejection. Simply as a possibility. Rebecca looked at each of her children one final time before turning toward the walkway. Then she paused and faced me. Thank you, she said. The words caught me by surprise. For what? I asked. Her eyes moved toward the house. Toward the family dinner waiting inside. Toward the life that continued despite everything. For raising them. I glanced at my children standing together behind me. The truth was they had helped raise each other too. We survived because we stayed together. We became strong because we had no other choice. Rebecca nodded once and slowly walked toward her car. Nobody stopped her. Nobody asked her to stay. But nobody closed the door on her either. Sometimes the greatest consequence is not being hated. It is realizing you are no longer essential to a story that once revolved around you. As her car disappeared down the street, I looked at my children and saw not loss, but resilience. Not abandonment, but growth. Life had not given us the family we expected. It gave us the family we built. And in the end, that made all the difference. Looking back on this story, what would you have done if you were in Daniel's position? Would you have opened the door after 15 years? Share your thoughts below. And if stories about family, resilience, and second chances speak to you, consider subscribing so you can join us for the next journey.